Today, we're going to talk about the incredible life of a 14th century woman who, right on the brink of death, had a series of visions that gave us one of the most powerful messages of hope you'll ever hear. Her name was Julian of Norwich, and her story is just, well, it's something else.
He did not say, "You shall not be troubled," but he said, "You shall not be overcome." Think about that for a second. That's one of Julian's most powerful insights. It's not a promise that life will be easy, but a promise that in the end will be okay. And what's really amazing is where this message came from. Not from a place of peace and comfort, but from 16 divine showings she had while she was literally lying on her deathbed.
So to understand how she got to that point, we have to rewind a bit, back to a prayer she made when she was a young woman. Julian of Norwich was an anchoress, which means she was a religious recluse, voluntarily walled into a tiny room attached to a church for life. And she was living through the absolute chaos of the 14th century. We're talking the Black Death, constant war, all kinds of religious turmoil. And from inside this tiny cell, she asked God for something really, really strange.
Nope, she didn't ask for a long life, or for wealth, or even for good health. Not in the way you and I might think of it. What she wanted was something way more intense. She wanted a direct, personal, and even painful way to understand God's love on a much, much deeper level. I mean, just look at this list. The audacity of this prayer is just stunning. First, she wanted to feel Christ's suffering as if she were there. Second, she asked for a near-death illness so she could be totally purified. And third, she wanted to receive 3 spiritual wounds: intense sorrow for sin, true empathy for Christ's pain, and this overwhelming, all-consuming desire for God. She was basically asking to be completely broken down so that she could be rebuilt in faith. While in 1373, when Julian was 30 and a half years old, her prayer was answered. And it was answered in the most terrifying way you can possibly imagine. She was hit with a brutal illness that brought her right to the very edge of death. And this illness was unbelievably fast. We're talking within just 4 days, she went from being perfectly fine to having a priest give her the last rites. Everyone around her, and Julian herself, was convinced it was over. But it was right there, in that darkest possible moment, that her prayer was about to be answered. So, picture this. A priest is holding up a crucifix for her to look at as she dies. Her vision is fading, the room is getting dark, but as she stares at that cross, she suddenly sees fresh blood trickling down from it. The crucifix isn't just a statue anymore. It's alive with the very suffering she had prayed to understand. This was the start of her 16 visions. And what happened next was one of her most famous, most mind-bending visions. But it didn't involve some grand heavenly spectacle. It was all about something incredibly small and ordinary. In one of her visions, God showed her what she called a little thing, the size of a hazelnut, just lying in the palm of her hand. And her first very human reaction was to ask, what on earth can this be? She saw it was round like a ball, and it seemed so fragile, like it could just crumble into nothing at any second. The answer she got was just astonishing. That tiny little hazelnut, it was everything that is made. The entire universe, all of creation, the whole shebang was contained in something so tiny and simple. What a profound lesson in perspective that is. So why does this little, fragile universe keep on existing? She was given 3 simple, beautiful truths. God made it, God loves it, and God looks after it. It survives not because it's strong, but because the love of its creator is constant and holds it all together. And this idea, this theme of an all-powerful, unconditional love became the absolute core of all her revelations. It led her to see God and even sin in a way that was completely different from the harsh, punishing theology that was so common in her time. This brought her to a really radical new understanding of sin. You know, the common teaching back then was all about God's wrath and punishment for sin. But Julian was told something pretty shocking. In her vision, God tells her sin is befitting, which in Middle English means it's necessary. It has a purpose. She saw it not as something that makes God angry, but more like a painful wound that God allows us to have so we can learn humility and ultimately be drawn even closer through healing and forgiveness. And if you think that was radical, she pushed the boundaries even further when she described God as a mother. And look at her words here. This isn't just some nice little metaphor for her. She says God is our mother in 2 very specific ways. First, by creating us, and second, by taking on our human nature through Christ. This was a deep theological statement, framing God's love as nurturing, unconditional, and just fundamental to our very existence.
So this all leads us to the culmination of her visions, the message she's most remembered for. After seeing all the pain and sin in the world, Julian was deeply, deeply troubled. She wondered how anything could ever possibly be right. And God's answer to her is one of the most famous and comforting phrases in all of spiritual writing.
Now, this wasn't a denial of suffering, not at all. It was a radical declaration of trust in a divine love so powerful that in the end, it will resolve all pain, mend everything that's broken, and make all things well. It is an absolute promise of ultimate healing, giving to a dying woman in the middle of the 14th century.
And that leaves us with a final thought. Julian of Norwich lived through the Black Death, the 100 Years' War, and huge religious divides, yet her big takeaway from a direct encounter with the divine was a message of overwhelming optimism and unfailing love. So the question for us is, how can her vision of a universe held in a tiny hazelnut and her radical trust that all shall be well give us some perspective in our own troubled times?